everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about books, and today I'm going to be giving you recommendations for every month of the year for the Buzzwordathon Readathon Challenge. If you don't know what the Buzzwordathon Readathon Challenge is, I'm a little confused how you ended up on this video. If you're watching this video, you probably know what the Buzzwordathon Readathon Challenge is, so I won't spend too much time explaining it. I will just link the video down below to Kayla from Books and Lala and her video where she explains how she is reformatting the Buzzwordathon Readathon this year. It's going to be more community-based, and she already announced the challenge for every single month of the year. So I personally am not going to be trying to participate in the Buzzwordathon Challenge every single month of the year. I'm just gonna kind of pick and choose when I feel like participating, when the prompt fits really well with some books I have on my TBR, because I'm trying to be better this year about reading books I already own instead of buying books to participate in readathons and challenges. So I don't want to stretch myself too far for that. But I did think it would be fun to give you guys recommendations for every single month of the year in case you are stuck on a prompt, looking for a good book to read. You don't want to just settle for something. You want to make sure you're getting a really good book to fit into the readathon challenges. So I am here to give you recommendations of books I have loved that fit every single prompt for 2021, and I'll also be sharing some books that I have on my TBR that if I'm going to participate will be on my radar. So let's jump right on into it. For the first month of the year in January, the first prompt is to read books with the word dream in the title. Now I only have one recommendation that I've personally read to fit in this prompt, but it is one of my top favorite books of all time. I recommend this book all the time to everyone, so it's definitely a good one to have, and that is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a nonfiction memoir style work that is just written in such a unique, engrossing, beautiful way. If you are a lover of language, a lover of media and books and movies and just tropes in general that you recognize, then you will definitely appreciate the format of this book because every single chapter follows a different trope as she is telling her story about her time in an abusive relationship with another woman, and she contextualizes each little vignette into a certain trope. It's a little tricky to explain because it is so unique, but I promise it is just such beautiful writing, easily the best memoir I've ever read, and in my top favorite books of all time for sure. I will say this book does cover very serious and heavy topics, namely abuse in relationships a lot, so definitely content trigger warnings for that. If that is something you want to stay away from, then I would definitely not recommend this book to you, but if that is something you are okay with reading, this is just a really beautiful story. I have a lot of books on my radar that have the word dream in the title that I just haven't gotten to yet, and those include The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain, Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angelis, Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, The Bazaar of Bad Dreams by Stephen King, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. So hopefully sharing those can give you some inspiration too, in case any of those might also be on your radar, but I cannot personally attest to them because I have not read them yet. Next, we'll move on to February, and the prompt for February is to read books with a color in the title. So every other month, the challenge will alternate between being a word in the title or a certain theme of words in the title. And so in February, you can read books with any color in the title: red, white, blue, green, purple, gray, silver. You have a large amount of options for you. So I have a couple really solid recommendations from books that I've read and loved for this prompt. First up, a triple threat, red, white, and royal blue, that has 3 colors in the title alone, and this is another one of my all-time favorite books and definitely my favorite romance book I've ever read. So if you're looking for some February romance, this is definitely the way to go. This is a story that follows the Prince of England and the son of the president in the United States, and they have this like mutual distaste towards each other. They're not exactly enemies, but they definitely are not friends, and they get put into a situation where they have to fake a friendship, and then that turns into a romance, and it is the most adorable thing. It is the most beautiful portrait of the future America that we all want to live in. It is just a really good time, really cute. It is a little longer of a romance book, but it really goes super fast paced. You can't stop flipping the pages, and it is just such a good time. I know this book has been hyped up a lot. I don't even like romance a lot, so it was very surprising to me that this book was so impactful for me that I enjoyed it so much. So it really is a true gem. Next up, have a double threat with 2 colors in the title, and that is I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. This is a shorter nonfiction book where Austin Channing Brown is describing her experiences as a Black woman in America, in the workforce, and all of the racism that she has endured throughout her lifetime, and how she continues to persist to fight against racism. It is a really inspiring book. It goes by really, really quickly because it is so short, so it is good if you're trying to pack a lot of books into this readathon, and it will really help break some bad thinking habits, make you question things more, especially if you are interested in learning more about racism in the workplace. I thought this was a good kind of introductory level text to some of that because I haven't read a ton about that, and I found this book to be particularly useful in just navigating some of that. So would highly recommend this one. It was also a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, so if you like reading her usual book club picks, you'll probably really like this one as well. Next, if you're looking for a classic, you could read The Scarlet Letter. I haven't read this since college. It's been several years now, but I remember actually enjoying this quite a bit. Classics are usually hit or miss with me. I either really enjoy them or I just have a really hard time pushing myself to get through them, but this one I remember actually really enjoying. If you don't know what this is about, it is set in the 17th century Puritan world. It follows a woman, Hester Prynne, who ends up having a child out of wedlock and the shame that she endures in her community because of this. It is one of my favorite classics that I read in school and had the chance to analyze and write essays on, so it's a pretty engaging book, and if you are trying to get more classics in your reading this year, that could be a good way to fit one in. And finally, I would also recommend Green Glass House. I'm actually still currently in the middle of reading this one right now, but it is a good, nice, cozy winter read. If you're still trying to embrace the winter vibes in February, this could be a good way to go. It is a middle grade mystery about this boy who is living at this hotel. The hotel is known for hosting smugglers, and he ends up just engrossed in this mystery as he finds this secret map and is trying to figure out what's going on, and is just set on a journey with all these wild characters showing up at the hotel. So it's tons of fun, it's super cozy, and it reads really quickly because it is a middle grade story. If you're looking for a YA fantasy to read, you could also read Red Queen. It has been a while since I've read this. I read it back in high school, but I remember it being one of the fantasy books that I actually really enjoyed, and I actually kept reading this series, which is very rare for me when I do read fantasy books. Like I said, I did read it many years ago, so maybe my standards would change now, but I do want to give this a reread eventually. I remember it being something about there being this world where people have silver blood or red blood, and there's a real class difference between those red bloods and silver bloods, and you follow a main character, Mare, who is living in the poverty world but ends up finding that she has this power. She's very strong. She ends up getting immersed into the royal world as they try to set her up to marry a prince, and it is just a whole journey from there. As for books that I have on my TBR that have colors in the title, the list could go on endlessly, but a couple of my top picks would be White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Next, we have March, and the prompt for March is to read books with the word time in the title. I actually only have one book that I have ever read that had the word time in the title, and that is A Wrinkle in Time, which I did really enjoy when I was a child reading that book for the first time, and I thought it was a very cool book, but I actually watched the movie when it came out and I didn't really like it as much. So I don't know if I would even really recommend that one. It might be fun to look back on if you're just trying to hit some children's classics. That could be a fun one to read. Other than that, I don't have any other books that I've ever read with the word time in the title. So this might be a good one for me to participate in so that I can hit some of these books that are on my radar. And the two main books that I do have on my radar are The Time Machine by H.G. Wells and Swing Time by Zadie Smith. Next we have April, and the theme for April is to read space or galaxy themed books. So this could be anything with anything relating to space, the galaxy, the universe in the title. So things like sun, star, moon, Milky Way, universe, you get the point. So the first recommendation I have is The Fixed Stars by Molly Weisenberg. This is a memoir that came out, I think last year. I listened to this one on audiobook and I really enjoyed it. It is a story about a woman who is in a relationship with a man man, and then she comes to terms with her sexuality and actually ends up leaving her husband and marrying a woman. It is a memoir that asks a lot of questions about identity and sexuality and just how we choose to live our lives and change our lives and navigate our lives, and it's just a really great, inspiring book. Next we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book that I read and I did not like this book, but I can see why a lot of people would, so I still do recommend it. This is a story about a young guy who is, I think he's in college, he is in the library one day and he finds this book that is telling a story that he himself has lived about a boy who sees a door that he decides not to enter. That may not sound like a full plot, but it is. It's a fantasy. It was not a real door. He sees a door one day, like on a wall, walking home from school, where there's never been a door before. It's very magical looking, and he chooses not to go in it. And so then he finds this book that is telling this story, and he's seeing his life in the book. And it is so tricky to explain this book because it's not really a cohesive storyline. You may find yourself thinking, where's the plot? Like I did. But if you really like fantasy that is written very lyrically, that is very atmospheric, that maybe feels like you're not really sure what's going on, but you're just along the journey with him, then I think you would really like this one. He meets a lot of interesting characters. He ends up in this interesting world of just endless rooms and libraries, and it is just truly an adventure. Next, I have The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. So this is a thriller book that has a paranormal side to it. So if you are looking for something a little spooky, this could be a good one to try out. This story follows a girl as she tries to figure out what happened to her aunt. So her aunt used to work at the Sundown Motel many years ago, and then she went missing and has never been found, no trace of her ever to be seen. So this girl is really interested in true crime and investigating things, going to the library, filing through the archives, and trying to solve the mystery of what happened to her aunt. So she ends up going and actually working at the Sundown Motel herself, and they have very interesting experiences. You get to read from both perspectives and figure out what happened to the aunt as the niece is also figuring it out herself. Like I said, it's paranormal as well, so expect some spooky moments. Overall, I didn't love this book. I liked it, but I didn't know it was going to be paranormal when I read it, so I really like to let people know when they're interested in it, like, hey, this is a paranormal thriller, not just a real life thriller, because there are some things in the ending that you do have to suspend your disbelief and buy into, and I was not prepared for that. So just know going in, this is paranormal. It'll be a spooky, fun, good time if you know that much. And lastly, I would very highly recommend The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. This is one of my favorite series of all time. I loved this series when I was a teenager. I really want to read them again soon. I'm actually currently reading the Wires and Nerves graphic novel spin-off stories that were done from this series. But The Lunar Chronicles in itself is sci-fi retellings of fairy tales. It is so immersive. I love all the characters. They're all so quirky and fun to follow. And the first book starts with our character Cinder, who is a cyborg. And this is a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella. So she's got this stepmom and stepsisters who are evil and just mean to her. And the whole world in itself is in disarray. There is a plague going around. There is this feud between people who live on Earth and the moon and the evil queen who lives on the moon. It is just a whole world full of things going on that are so fun. And just like Cinderella, she ends up becoming entangled with a prince. And I just love this book so much. I love this series so much. It's such a fun time. The second book is Scarlet, and that goes with Little Red Riding Hood. Then you have Cress, which is like Rapunzel, and then there's Winter, which is like Snow White, and then there are prequels and spin-offs, and it is just so fun. I just love this universe so much. So I would really highly recommend this, and I probably want to give it a reread around this time during the year as well. As for other books that are on my radar, I have quite a long list because this is a broad theme. So that includes Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time by Hope Nicholson, The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips, All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace, Where the Forest Meets the Stars by Glendy Vandera, Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake, and Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro Kazuo. Next up in May, the prompt is to read books with the word house or home in the title. So for this prompt, I could yet again recommend Green Glass House. Like I said, cozy, middle grade, mystery, fun times. But I also want to recommend one of my other favorite books of all time, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. If you like really whimsical, witty, emotional, heartwarming, heartfelt stories, this is going to be the perfect book for you. I love this book with my whole entire heart. It is about this home for magical youth. In this world, there are kids that have some sort of magic abilities. That's not unheard of, it's pretty normal. And so they have this organization that monitors these magical youth just to keep an eye on them, make sure everything's okay. Magical youth are sort of outcast from society anyway. People are sort of skeptical about them. But in this one particular house that we are following in this book, this is the house where the most dangerous of the magical youth live, or at least what society believes is the group of the most dangerous magical youth. And one of the workers from this organization is set on the task to go to this house and monitor activities, see what's going on, report on the status, basically see if it needs to be shut down or not, how things are going. This is one of those stories that follows my favorite trope, which is where there's a group of like misunderstood children and a misunderstood adult who have to come together and they help each other heal along the way, and it's just so heartwarming. All the characters are so quirky and fun and witty, and you'll cry, you'll laugh, it'll just be such a wonderful time. I could not recommend this book enough. If you want something spooky, you could read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is his new book that came out last year. This is a story that follows a young woman who is going back to the house that she grew up in, which was supposedly haunted, to sell the house after her father's passing. She doesn't remember what happened when she lived there as a kid with her parents, but it is just this huge famous spectacle. It is known that this is a huge haunted house. Her dad ended up writing a book about the paranormal experiences they had in the house, so it is just famous across the entire nation. But she can't personally remember anything haunted happening. And then when she goes back to this house, she starts having some spooky experiences and is trying to figure out what happened while she was a child growing up in this house and what is going on in there now. I will say, if you have seen The Haunting of Hill House, the TV show, you're going to really see some similarities. That nagged at me a little bit as I was reading this book, and I wish it would have been a little more original off of that story, but it's still a fun time. If you haven't seen The Haunting of Hill House, it'll be a brand new story to you and you'll just have a good time. And then I would also recommend Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This is not a book that I personally loved, but if you're someone who likes a really weird story, you don't really know what's going on, you don't really understand the plot, you don't really like the characters, you're just in for a weird, submersive time, this is gonna be the book for you. I really like to understand my characters and their motives and to really feel connected to them and to really want to follow them throughout the story. That's not the type of book this is, so if that's something that's important to you, you might not like it either. But this is a book about a girl who ends up going to this boarding school where you go there for 3 years, you can't have any connections to the outside world, and at the end of it, you're promised with just success. It's a very prestigious school, so if you go there, you're gonna have a great life ahead of you because you have the honor of having gone to Catherine House. Once our main character gets to Catherine House, she finds out there are some weird things going on in the school, and you just get to ride that journey with her throughout her 3 years there. So that's pretty much the whole plot. You just kind of go on an adventure with her, even though she's not super curious and doesn't really investigate a lot, and she's kind of terrible to follow as a main character, but that's just my opinion. If you like really weird stuff and you just want to have a weird atmosphere and be kind of confused, this could be a fun one for you. Speaking of spooky books, and speaking of The Haunting of Hill House, I would also recommend The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I just recently read this classic horror book finally for the first time, and I will definitely say it is very different from the show. So if you've seen the show and you think you might like the book, they're not super related in any way whatsoever. In the book, we follow a group of characters who gets pulled together by this doctor who is going to be researching the effects of a haunted house. So he's writing a research paper and he is investigating how a haunted house can affect people. And so he gathers people from around the country who have had some sort of weird paranormal experience in their life before because he thinks they might be susceptible to it or sensitive to it to be able to pick up on it, brings them all together, and they go stay in this house for the summer. At first, weird paranormal things start happening and they think it's kind of fun and funny, and then things start getting a little more personal and maybe even threatening, and then they're not having such a good time anymore. I will say I gave this about a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite story I've ever read. I just kind of thought it was okay, but you also have to keep in mind it is a classic haunted house story that is the foundations and the bones of what a haunted house story is, not so much what we kind of expect in modern works today that have been reusing that story over and over and over again. I will say this book does do a good job of characters. I really enjoyed the characters in the story. They were also distinct and interesting to follow, and that is one of my favorite things, so I had a good time with this. And as for books that I have on my radar, I have The Upstairs House by Julia Fine, A House is a Body by Shruti Swami, and The Good House by Tananarive Due. Next we have June, and the prompt for June is to read books with a name or title in the title. So that could be anything like King, Queen, Mr., Mrs., or any other sort of title that you have. First up, I have The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. If you typically like Ruth Ware's books, then I think you'll really like this one as well. This one follows the story of a girl who ends up getting a letter about an inheritance to claim, but it gets mixed up. It's not actually supposed to be her inheritance, but she tries to seize the opportunity anyway, and then she finds out there are some strange things going on with this family in general that she ends up getting all caught up in. This is another one that I really want to give a reread because it's been a couple years, so I might end up squeezing this one in this month as well. Next, I would recommend Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jossi. This is a book about a woman who is going through a pretty difficult time. Her brother passed away due to drug addiction, her mom is depressed and can barely get out of bed, and she is also currently studying neuroscience to try to specifically understand depression and addiction. Throughout this book, there's a lot of navigation between science and religion and how you can understand these things that happen to people. It is a very sad book, it's very heavy, but it is also just so beautifully written. It is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. It was one that I just wanted to underline every sentence in the book for how well it was written. And it is one that has stayed with me in such an interesting way where I don't really think a lot about the plot of the book and like certain things that happen, but I just can feel how that book made me feel when I think about it and just how beautiful it was. So I definitely highly recommend this one. If you want to stretch the prompt a little bit, you could read kind of anything by Stephen King because, you know, his name's King. King would be on the title of any of the books, but to go really specific, maybe you could also read Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I've never read this one. Just a thought. My personal favorite Stephen King book is The Shining. I don't really like a lot of the Stephen King that I have read, but The Shining is one that I really enjoyed. I think it does a good job of exploring complex human emotions, and it just truly brings out the best of King's psychological horror, which is what I really enjoy from him. So would really recommend that one if you want to try to stretch the prompt a little bit. And then finally, I would recommend Lord of the Flies as another classic if you're trying to squeeze more classics in. This is a book about a bunch of boys who end up deserted on this island together and the lengths they will go to survive, and just sort of what happens with human nature when you put a group of boys on an island. What are they going to do to survive? It is very gritty and dark and surprising that we read this when we're so young, but definitely an interesting book to read and one of the classics that I have really enjoyed. As for books on my radar that have names or titles in the title, I have The Mystery of Miss Christie by Marie Benedict, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine, Mrs. Everything by Jennifer Weiner, The Other Misras by Mary Kubica, and Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. Hello, Editing Ashley here. I am exhausted with this video. It's already so long, so I'm actually going to split this up into a part 1 and part 2. You already probably know that by now. It was probably already in the title, but I just needed to give you a sign off, a close off. That part 2 is coming soon, where I will talk about the months of July throughout December, all the recommendations for the rest of the year. I just did not want this video to literally be an hour long. So I hope you enjoyed this part 1. Look out for part 2 coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.